Hey everybody, what's going on? Hellmite here, bringing you another video from Grab the Lantern today. Today's video, I'm going to be taking a look at 2020's champions and generally giving my opinion of where they have all landed. Now, this won't be something where I assign a grade or anything or say, you know, this champion is a failure. Rather, it's more of a retrospective on where Riot's releases this year ended up. Now, a couple caveats to start off with. Aphelios is not on this list. He was technically released last year, so he is not going to be evaluated. I will also not be evaluating Rel, as obviously she hasn't come out yet. She'll be releasing sometime in the middle of December, and I figure with the holidays going on, it'll be difficult to get an honest sense for where she is at before the end of the year. So I figure it makes a lot more sense to leave her off the list and just talk about the rest of the champions that were released or reworked this year, as that's still a ton of champions. Without further ado, let's go ahead and jump all the way back into January talking about Set. Now, Set, I think, is a very popular champion. He's definitely fallen off as time's gone on. When he first came out, there were a ton of people playing him, and now he really is not that popular of a champion anymore. You still see him quite a bit, but he's also not like a pick ban champion at all anymore. I generally feel like he's fine. He does his job as a beefy frontline damage dealer. He doesn't have as much of in-fight sustain as a lot of other juggernauts, but he's more of a champion that sort of looks for his moment and then makes it happen with Showstopper into ideally a big haymaker, and relies on his sort of deceptive durability from his passive to thrive. He's also a very good split pusher. I think he does a lot of interesting things for the game. Most importantly, he is very simple to play, which I think is something that Riot has been shying away from, not because they think that simple champions are boring, but because there's only so much you can do with a simple design. There are only so many simple designs that exist in the game, so I do think it's nice that we finally have a simple champion, though, back in the game as sort of this really nice juggernaut-type character. Obviously, he's had some pro play issues that may or may not still exist, but his design, I fundamentally feel, isn't problematic. I think that the true damage part on his W just makes it so that he doesn't care who he's punching. It's sort of target agnostic damage. If he punches you, it's gonna hurt no matter what. And he has a decent amount of flexibility, unlike some juggernauts like Garen, who when they fall behind, they don't do anything. Set at least can tackle divers away from his team with Showstopper. He has, like I said, a little bit of deceptive durability, getting that big ol' shield from Haymaker. He has some CC. I really like what he kind of does. Now, I'm a little disappointed with Set from a flavor perspective. I feel like Riot are considering him a monster or non-human champion, which doesn't make any sense. He's not even as furry as Rengar, so he shouldn't really count as a monster champion. He's just sort of a slightly fluffy regular guy. So I dislike that, and also, flavor-wise, there's just not that much to talk about. It feels like the lore was created to justify a brawler champion, but unlike other champions, like Seraphine, for example, this at least works pretty well with his lore. It kind of makes sense. It kind of illuminates Ionia a little bit. It makes Ionia less of a sort of monolithic, we're peaceful, we have martial arts, and we have a very down-to-earth character like Set, which I think is good for the region as a whole, and good for the IP and sort of developing things out away from very stereotypical assumptions about different regions. It's the same reason I like Samira, who's someone who enjoys what she does and enjoys her work, so that's very nice. Moving on to the next champion, Lilia. Outside of pro play, Lilia has generally fallen completely off the map. Set's pretty popular, but Lilia just rarely gets played, which is maybe a little bit of a flavor win because she is very skittish by nature, but it is a little disappointing to see her disappear because I think she's a super interesting designed skirmisher. She feels super flavorful because her whole shtick is whack somebody and then run away and wait for cooldowns, then run up real quick and whack them again and run away again, which very much feels like a skittish deer who's sort of playing this in and out game. And she has significant weaknesses in her early game clears and ganks, but she sort of gets to scale to become the powerhouse if the rest of her team enables her. I think she has enough tools to make some interesting plays, especially with Swirl Seed, setting her up for potentially some very long-range ganks in conjunction with her ultimate. I think her ultimate gives her some degree of utility, as long as she coughs it up before she dies, she will still get some value for her team. So Lilia that's behind can at least whack maybe a champion or two with her Q, and then press R and hopefully try to run away. But she really does need to scale, and I think that's part of the reason why she's not very popular in pro play, because she needs that scaling and she needs that sort of enabling, whereas some other skirmishers like Yone, for example, or Yasuo can kind of function on their own without a full team. Unlike Zoe as well, I know she's our only other sleep champion. Lilia's sleep feels impactful but not overly frustrating. I feel like Zoe, it's a question of her play pattern, whereas Zoe lands the sleep and kills you in one hit, whereas Lilia doesn't feel like she'll do that. It feels like her slow is more or less or her sleep is more or less I got hit by that, here it comes, I have plenty of time to see it, and it's going to be used in conjunction with other things she does, but rarely are you just going to take the sleep and then die instantly, which I do think is really nice. She's likely to remain very niche, but I still think Lilia is a super interesting champion that's in a unique place on the roster, and I would love to see more champions like her. And speaking of Yone, up next is Yone. He's one of the most popular champs released this year. He's Yasuo 2.0, and he's definitely living up to that hype, but like a lot of the other champions this year, I haven't seen him that much. I've definitely seen him more than I think I would say Set or Lilia, but he's definitely not a champion that's been super high rate pick ban sort of played. Interestingly enough, I like him way better than I like his brother, which is funny, because it just feels like Yone gets to pick his moment very carefully. He gets to sort of wait for an opportunity, then use the Spirit Unbound, run down the enemy team, try to get as much damage in, have that big impact with his ultimate, and then pop back to where he was before. Unlike Yasuo, who sort of has to dash around spastically the whole time he's in lane, because otherwise he's not getting value, he's not doing that much. But it's a lot of wasted motion, I feel like, whereas Yone is very much so calm until he sees his moment and then he strikes, which I do think is nice. Now, Yone wasn't viable in pro play at all this year. I'm unsure we'll see that he'll see play when he's enabled, because I just think he is very telegraphed if he's doing things like trying to stack his Q in lane to threaten a trade or an all-in. He's shoving the wave, and unlike many other assassins, Yone doesn't really have ways out. He sort of has an outplay or die type playstyle, very much like Yasuo, where if you get ganked and you're pushed up as Yone, you're either outplaying the enemy team to either kill one of them or to escape, or you're dying. There's no way around it. You're not going to outrun them. You're not going to be able to just use your mobility skills to escape. He doesn't really have that, which is an interesting motif for an assassin to have, but I do quite like what it means for Yone, and that it gives him vulnerabilities, and it's sort of a trade-off for him having higher DPS overall than a champion like Zed, for example, whose DPS isn't very high, but whose burst is very good. Like Yasuo as well, he has a very simple kit, but one of the surprising amount of complexity, similar, of course, to Yasuo, where this is a champion you can pick up and press buttons on him and generally sort of get what he does. He's slightly more complicated than Yasuo just because of the way his E works, and that you really kind of have to know that there's the extra damage you'll get after the pop, that you have to go back to it. There is no pulling a LeBlanc and just sort of walking away on that, so it's just a very interesting, a very interesting kit for Yone to have, and I do like how it sort of has a low floor to play, but a very high ceiling to master this champion and really figure out what he's doing. From a thematic perspective, I'm glad his story isn't just he's Yasuo's dead brother. Yone has his own arc. In fact, his lore almost very barely mentions Yasuo at all. We kind of know where he's at, but it's not like the game in and of itself is sort of like, yeah, this is exactly who he is. He's just Yasuo's brother. He sort of has his own arc, which I think is going to be very interesting to see where it goes forward. And it kind of remains to be seen how Riot will handle him. I do feel like he may just sort of disappear from the lore entirely. He's just kind of Yone off doing his own thing. We wanted a second Yasuo, but didn't know how to handle him in the flavor. So again, we'll kind of have to see where he ends up going to in the future. I am still excited to see where Riot take him, and like I said, I think he's a very interesting kit. They managed to make Yasuo 2.0 without just making it Yasuo again. He's similar, but does have enough that he's doing on his own. Samira is up next, and whoo boy, this is going to be a fun one. She is the most popular champion on this list, but also is the champion that's banned the most. Now, this isn't necessarily a surprise. Popular champions oftentimes get banned just because people are sick and tired of seeing them. And she's also a controversial champion and receiving additional nerfs on the next patch. Samira tends to be a very feast or famine champion, though. She's the kind of champion that can just, like, run away with a game like Draven, but also is the kind that can do absolutely nothing if she gets suppressed early on. A lot of the same champions that enable her, like Alistar or Braum, also are champions that can just shut her down and sort of say, no thank you, please, Samira, and just really make it so that she doesn't have a good time. She has some play from behind patterns, but she really doesn't annihilate teams by pressing R unless she's already ahead, or her team has set her up for success by sort of chain CCing the enemy team and keeping them locked up in an AoE for Samira to do damage with. I acknowledge why Samira is frustrating to deal with. I don't think she's as much of a problem as many other players make her out to be. I just feel like, as with a lot of other lane bullies, giving her respect and sort of saying, yeah, that's Samira. She's going to try an all-in. She has a very strong all-in. If she's level 6, she has her ultimate, so save CC for that. Like, there are a lot of ways I feel like you can play around Samira that players just sort of don't respect or don't understand, and then they get killed by it. That's not to say she isn't overpowered, right? Are nerfing her, and I tend to trust their numbers, but I generally feel like she's actually in an okay spot, at least design-wise. I don't think her kit is particularly totally broken. She's another easy-to-play, hard-to-master champion on the list, like many of the others. So Riot have at the very least found their stride in regards to champion design. This is the 3rd champion this year who has been easy to play, hard to master, which I really do like. I like those kinds of designs because it gives you a lot of room to see where this champion can go and what the champion can do, but it also makes it feel accessible. So if I'm a new player and I really think, oh, hey, Samira looks super fun to play, I can at least pick her up and not feel like I have no idea what's going on in regard to that champion. I think she has some of the best flavor of 2020's releases, but feels underloved by the community. This might be because of her balance perceptions. No one wants to give her any credit because they're like, no, this champion is broken, I hate her, I won't give her any credit, but I really do like her flavor. I think she's in a very interesting spot. She does sort of feel like a League of Legends take on Dante without also being just super obviously Dante, so I do sort of like that. I like her sort of stacking mechanics, and I do like how, again, she's sort of having a fun time. She's sort of this old gal who's still fighting and still killing people because she thinks it's fun, so that's really, really neat, and I do like Samira as a champion, balance issues aside. Talking about the most recent release now in Seraphine. Now, she's been decently popular, but not incredibly so. She's not pushing Yone's limits, for example, but people are still playing Seraphine quite a bit, which does make sense because she is the newest champion in the game right now. It really does feel like her backstory and appearance were all designed with KDA in mind, which just leads to a disconnect between Seraphine's visuals and her lore and the rest of the setting. But that's essentially what I already mentioned in a previous video, so I'm not going to harp on it too much. But either way, it does feel like Seraphine sort of got made because Riot wanted another KDA member, and everything else stemmed from that, which just makes her feel like not a very interesting character at all. She's sort of an outlier, again, in regards to incorporating unique character archetypes into League of Legends. Again, she's sort of a music mage, but we already have a music mage. She's a little bit of a different music mage, but the flavor is not totally there for me. At the very least, though, her kit is very solid, despite comparisons to the thematically similar Sona and mechanically similar champs like Orianna and Karma. I think Seraphine strikes a delicate balancing act with her own reasons to exist and reasons to be picked. In regards to Orianna, who's mostly damage with a little bit of utility, and Karma, who's a little bit of 50-50, I feel like Seraphine is more on the side of being a supportive mid laner. I do feel like she's better in the mid lane than at support position, even though people really like playing her support. And Riot have at least said they want to try to support both playstyles. Now, we'll see how successful they are with that. Obviously, they've made these promises many times before about champions like Brand or Annie or Morgana or Zyra, where they say, we want to support their mid lane playstyle in addition to their support playstyle, and then the mid lane playstyle totally disappears in favor of the support playstyle. So we'll kind of have to see how that balances out for Seraphine, but I do feel like she has a lot of really interesting tools she brings to the table. I think she's an underrated champ in regards to her impact on games because she's not really a carry champion, but she's still deserving of a spot on teams, especially if, for example, Orianna gets banned out and you still want a protect the AD carry composition. Seraphine is a really good champion then to pick up to fill that spot. I feel like her biggest flaw is just how much her overall design suffered because of the KDA constraints, and she also has the worst excuse for an ultimate skin I have ever seen in League of Legends, especially now that we know that Battle Queen Katarina exists, and that is better than each of Seraphine's individual legendary skins. Battle Queen Katarina is better in every way. So, in general, I do feel like she's a little disappointing from those perspectives, but I do feel like, mechanically at least, she's in a very good spot. Moving on to our reworks. Now, we only had 2 this year, which is good because this video is already dragging on, and I kind of promised I wouldn't do more than one of these long videos, but let's go ahead and talk about Fiddlesticks. Now, Fiddles is super niche, which shouldn't be a surprise, really, given his general thematics, and he wasn't very popular beforehand, but Riot have done an excellent job with reflavoring and redesigning a poorly aged champion from the beginning of League of Legends. It now looks and feels like the terrifying, not a scarecrow that it was always meant to be, because it's not a scarecrow. Fiddlesticks is a demon pretending to be a scarecrow, and it sort of fits that archetype perfectly in that you're like, yeah, that looks like a scarecrow, but also the way it moves, the way it talks, everything it does is just deliciously flavorful and super spooky, and I absolutely love everything from a flavor perspective about where Fiddlesticks is at. I feel like its new kit serves its theme as a fear-bringer while also maintaining some of its core abilities and playstyles from its previous incarnation. I really love how Riot did its passive. I think that was the perfect sort of way to indicate that Fiddlesticks has the ability to always make you worried about it being nearby because of all the effigies it puts up nearby. I wish there was a little bit more of a reward or a little bit easier for Fiddlesticks to pretend to be an effigy and then basically spook you from there. I feel like that's sort of an underutilized portion of Fiddlesticks' kit, but I do really like the amount of vision control it provides and the amount of paranoia it can bring to the enemy team, especially if it can find those ultimate flanks, because now that it fears the enemy team as well, that's a huge reward if Fiddlesticks can find a sort of quiet area of the map to post up in. I don't think I have much more to say than that. Fiddlesticks got one of the best reworks to come out in recent years, and even if it remains a relatively niche champion, I don't think I can really fault it too much. It's absolutely great. Finally, we're talking about Volabear. Now, Volabear is not quite as niche as Fiddlesticks, but he's still not incredibly popular. He is sort of a champion that gets played, but isn't, the first champion you would think of, probably even the third champion you'd think of playing at any given time. He's sort of like, oh yeah, okay, Volabear, yeah, I remember that guy, yeah, let's bring him out. Thematically, I feel like Volabear could have been pushed a little bit more by Riot. I feel like he goes too far into the stereotypical bear god archetypes. League of Legends tends to pick a very common archetype like Mermaid, for example, or Spartan Warrior or whatever, and really put their own spin on it. And I really do feel like Volabear just is a very straight bear god character. There's not that much else that goes on with him, especially in terms of his design. I feel like there could have been a lot more of the thunder in Volabear and a little bit, and they just sort of didn't do that. He's just kind of a big white bear god kind of guy. So that's a little disappointing. I get that they didn't want to go full Thousand Pierced Bear with the Volabear rework. They said players didn't like that, but I feel like they could have still pushed him a little bit further. Mechanically, he feels very similar to where he was before, but I feel like he has better play patterns now than he used to, and fulfills an interesting niche between Juggernauts and Vanguards. I really do feel like Volabear is significantly more of an interesting champion in regards to his playstyle and sort of bridging the gap between a super heavy fighter and also a champion that can initiate and do fun things for his team, which I do quite like. I think that's a really good niche for Juggernauts to have, especially because usually they tend to be just like a damage character. You pick them as sort of a second or maybe third carry, and Volabear can do that, but he can also just be the beef stick that starts the fight for you. I'm glad to see Thunders in his kit a little bit more than in his previous incarnation. It's still really easy to forget he has it, because Volabear feels more focused on the bear and less on the volley, for example. But that allows Kennen to remain as League's sort of Electromancer, as opposed to Volabear, who it feels like he's the only bear in the roster, so it does make sense for him to be the focus of the bear-like abilities, and for Kennen and Volabear to both kind of split the sort of thunder archetype. But I am glad that he has a decent amount of thunder in the kit, that he does still do some electromancy things, unlike in his previous incarnation where it was just on his ultimate. He has been a little rocky on balance, but it feels like Riot have gotten him into a better spot, and it feels like he can compete without being overbearing, if you'll forgive the absolutely unbearable pun. So generally, I feel like he's in a good spot, and I do like where he has ended up, especially in comparison to where he was before. I know I had some criticisms, but trust me, he's light years ahead of where he used to be. And that's it for me today, guys. Thank you all so very much for watching. And let me know what you thought of all of Riot's releases down in the comments. I would love to hear your opinions or comments or anything you particularly thought was interesting about the champions that came out or were reworked this year. If you enjoyed today's video, go ahead and leave a like. And if you really enjoyed today's video, consider subscribing. I upload a video every Monday, Friday, and on patch days as well. Once again, thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate it. And I'll talk to you all later.